You know that scene where Superman is on the ice, all battle damaged, and is about to whistle a tune? I actually thought he was going to start whistling that Old Spice little jingle for their commercial. And then I realized that this was the actual official teaser for the new Superman film. So I think it was really a missed opportunity. Like maybe he does whistle the Old Spice jingle and then Crypto shows up. I will say that's probably my favorite part of the entire trailer, that little sequence where Crypto shows up to save a battered Superman. I don't have any dogs at the moment, but I remember there being a time when I did have dogs as like a small kid and a teenager, and I have to say my dogs were useless. Like if I was drowning, they would probably just be like licking their testicles and just enjoying me dying. My dogs were useless. I don't think they ever really were capable of doing anything crazy like that. But it is worth mentioning, I think James Gunn for the longest time has showed a true capability of showcasing these like characters that you would never think would work in like a live action project. I mean, just stop to think for a second about how insane it is to have Rocket as the main character for Guardians of the Galaxy 3. For those of you guys that don't really keep up to date with the news, this was actually supposed to be a spin-off. There was supposed to be a prequel film that was going to feature Rocket and Groot going on their adventures, and I believe this was supposed to lead up to the original Guardians of the Galaxy. But back in the day, we just didn't get live action animals in films. It was very rare to see. Like maybe the Air Bud film franchises kind of did that from time to time. They used really cheap and cheesy CGI. We also had that like cat versus dog film that came out like, I don't know, 20 years ago. But again, nobody really took those live action animals seriously. But James Gunn is kind of like revamping that entire genre and doing something absolutely insane. We've already seen Rocket and Groot become like staples of the Guardians of the Galaxy, and now we're going to see Crypto in a live action Superman adaptation. It's absolutely mind-blowing. But if there's anybody that you can trust here, it definitely has to be James Gunn. He has the track record for being able to make really good comic book based films that are also incredibly successful at the box office, which we already know is an incredibly difficult thing to be doing right now, because it seems like almost every comic book based film that's being released is just absolutely bombing or flopping outright. You have, for example, all of the Sony projects that have been recently revealed. You had Craven, for example, which is getting panned by critics, and it's just not really making that much money. Same thing with the Marvels. The latest Doctor Strange installment. Black Adam was not only a huge disappointment, but it was also a huge hit to The Rock, which at the time, he was supposed to be one of the biggest superstars in the world, and anything that had his name attached to that particular project, it was going to at least make a decent profit, and not even he was able to save Black Adam, which is again another comic book based film. And so, as I said, James Gunn to me has the best track record. We can trust him. The trailer looks phenomenal. What's really interesting about this, and I've heard this from multiple different sources, I think multiple different articles have reported that James Gunn was so trustworthy that it really didn't matter what project he was interested in. Marvel Studios didn't really care about the source material. They didn't really care about what it is that James Gunn was bringing forward to the table, as long as it was James Gunn behind the camera, as long as he was the one directing, putting these films together. They were okay with him bringing whatever project that he wanted to. Unfortunately, obviously, his time at Marvel was very limited, or I should say, quote unquote, limited. He was only able to, give us a few films in the Marvel universe. However, there were a lot of different projects that he was planning on bringing full circle, especially anything that had to do with the Guardians of the Galaxy, which he eventually was just able to kind of own outright. They didn't really mess too much with his scheming or his blueprints for that particular team, and I think that it was for the best. Now it's really interesting. As I said, a lot of great characters are featured here. You had David Cornsweet playing Superman, obviously, and I will be brutally honest with you guys, I'm not really too familiar with all of the actors here. Usually I'm very well versed when it comes down to knowing actors and a lot of their roles, but I'm a little bit in the dark here according to my long extensive research, and that is usually just me dropping a deuce and using my phone to Google his name. He was featured in the film Twisters, which I have yet to finish. I think I'm maybe like an hour into it. it lost me a little bit. I think I'm going to try to jump back into it and actually finish it. And then he was also in the film Pearl, which as well I have not finished, or I haven't even started. I have heard some great raving reviews, but I haven't gone around to watching it. Same thing with his latest series, which is called We Own the City. I'm not sure how big of a role he has in there, but like I said, I don't have a ton of experience with this particular actor. But if James Gunn is willing to trust him, if he's willing to put this entire franchise on his shoulders, then I trust him as well. I will say I also love this suit. It's got like a little bit of a mix of what the classic suit looked like back in the day, as well as like a little mix of a more modern suit. I will say I slightly prefer this one over the Henry Cavill slash Zack Snyder universe version, just because I think that one was a little bit too modern for my taste and the colors were a little bit dulled out. Whereas, and I think James Gunn, being a huge, comic book fan, we've already known that, especially with Guardians of the Galaxy, he was digging really deep for a lot of these characters. He wasn't going with just marquee, well-known characters. A lot of the main characters in his universe, you had to dig pretty deep. I mean, their first appearances were maybe 30, 40, 50 years ago, and he was able to kind of call back to a lot of those. And I think that's what he's going to do here, especially with the outfits, particularly with Superman. I love the fact that he has a logo on the cape, which is something that I didn't think he was going to do. I'm trying to think back to all of the suits that we've seen so far in live action, at least in film adaptations, and I can't quite remember if that emblem has been ever featured or is as dominant as this particular version. So I'd have to actually like go back and look at like the Reeves and the Zack Snyders, but I don't think that we've ever seen a suit with the actual S logo on the cape, which is again a really cool callback to a lot of his comic or his first comic book appearances. Now Lois Lane will be played by Rachel Brosnahan, I think Brosnahan. I don't know exactly how to pronounce her last name. Again, very unknown to me personally. I know she's been featured on like House of Cards, The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, which both shows for some unknown reason I haven't gone around to watching, but I've heard both of them were like really well received and had glowing reviews, not only from critics, but normies really seem to love both shows. And she was a key pivotal character in each one of those. Now I will say, if there's one thing that's kind of semi disappointing to me, is the age of both of these characters. Not that there should be like an age limit to play any of these, but I just wanted this to be kind of like the beginning of like a huge cinematic universe. And we know James Gunn knows exactly how that works. He was in Marvel Studios for quite some years now, and he has a ton of experience. He knows how to put all of these things together. He knows how to intertwine all of the different universes and films. And I feel like he should have maybe gone for a couple of actors that were a little bit younger. I believe David will be or is 31 years of age. I'm not sure if he'll be 32 by the time the film actually debuts. And then Rachel is 34. So there's about a 3-year age gap, which you can't really tell in real life, but in the actual film, for some unknown reason, when David is supposed to be playing Clark Kent, he looks extremely young with like the curly hair and the glasses. I'm not sure what it is. I'm not sure if it's like some special effects that they're trying to work in there, but the dude looks extremely young. Whereas in Rachel, definitely looks older than him, at least in those sequences. Once he's Superman and he has the glasses off and maybe a little bit of battle damage on his face, he definitely looks a little bit older. And same thing in like real life, without makeup, without any costumes or special effects, he does look to play a 30-year-old. But like I said, I think I would have preferred somebody that was in like their early to mid 20s. That way I know for a fact that they're going to be in a cinematic universe for the next like 15 to 20 years. Whereas I think the shelf life for both of these actors is somewhat limited. I mean, 30 years is really not that big, especially in Hollywood, where, they can easily just go in there and touch up not only with makeup, but with like computers and special technology and things of that nature to make them look younger. But like I said, I would have preferred just younger actors as a whole. That's a big problem that we saw with Henry Cavill, where because the DCU was taking so long and there was just so much turmoil behind the scenes that a lot of the time the projects just took so long to come together and actually hit the big screen, that Henry Cavill was getting older before our eyes, and we just don't know how much longer he could have been able to play Superman. I think he could have played, like, if things were consistent in the cinematic universe, if Warner Bros. Wasn't in such disarray, maybe they would have been able to, push out films more consistently. But because they weren't able to, Henry Cavill just could not play Superman for 3 to 4 films in like a 15-year span. It just didn't make a lot of sense, and I feel like that could potentially happen here. But overall, I think, as I said, if James Gunn is going to trust both of these actors to kind of lead the entire franchise, I'm definitely okay with it. Millie Alcock is supposed to be playing Kara Zor-El. You guys should be familiar with this particular character in the comic books. She's essentially Superman's cousin, and, plays somewhat of a role within the entire DC universe. She's also Supergirl. She's definitely one of the more powerful superheroes in the entire DC universe. She's right up there with Superman. And then we have Nathan Fillion, who's supposed to be playing Guy Gardner, who's technically a Green Lantern. What's really interesting about Nathan is that I personally know him more for some of his live action television series appearances, more so than any of his films. He did have some pretty big cult following projects like Serenity, but most of the stuff that I know him from are like the TV shows The Rookie, which I haven't really watched them too much, but I've watched a ton of different ads for it. Like every time I'm on YouTube or every time I'm watching football or anything on live television, I get bombarded with TV advertisement for that. But he was also on stuff like Firefly, which is one of my favorite sci-fi series of all time. He was also on Castle, which is another one of my favorite shows. And I've never really considered him to be like a marquee actor in Hollywood, but I will say I'm really interested to see how he's able to portray his character in like an actual superhero movie. It's definitely a ton of pressure. We don't know exactly how big of a role the Green Lantern Corps is going to have in a Superman film. We know that there are some Green Lantern projects for the foreseeable future, but as of the moment, we don't really know exactly how big of a role a Green Lantern would have in a Superman movie. For all we know, he's just gonna have a small little cameo and then just disappears for the rest of the film, because I believe in the teaser he's only seen in like a couple of different sequences, so that just makes it a little bit more intriguing. Maybe that's kind of just setting up the future of the cinematic universe. Let's not forget, before James Gunn actually took over the DC cinematic universe, there were a bunch of projects, or at least that we know of, at least one live action project that was supposed to be like a show or a TV series that was supposed to be on HBO or Max or one of those different networks. And obviously, unfortunately, it never came to fruition because of just all the disarray that was happening behind the scenes here. And then finally, we have Nicholas Hoult playing Lex Luthor. I mean, we know Nicholas now for quite a few years. He's been on some phenomenal projects. One of my favorite has to be the Mad Max Fury Road appearance that he had in there. He was kind of a minor character. I think he played like a Half-Life in that film, but his performance really kind of drew me to him. He's had some other pretty semi-big roles as well. I have not watched Nosferatu's just yet, but he's supposed to be in that film. Same thing with Renfield, and he was in Warm Bodies, which was a film that I was heavily into when I was a teenager and just absolutely obsessed with zombie movies. I will say, and this might be my only critique of the entire teaser so far, it has to be the fact that I really hope Lex Luthor is not the main villain here, okay? Because it seems like every time we restart a new Superman universe or a new Superman franchise, Lex Luthor is just like the main guy. I really kind of wish that they would utilize some other big marquee Superman villains. You have, for example, Doomsday. I know he's already been featured in a number of different adaptations, and I know like every animated film that they ever released, which I'm a huge fan of the animated films. I know they've already done them like 3 to 4 different times. It feels like every time that Superman dies in a comic book series, he is also the one to kill Superman. But there's so many other big villains that they could have easily introduced here, like a Metallo maybe even a Brainiac. I don't think we've ever seen a Brainiac in a live action film. I think the last time we saw him was in a live action CW project. So there are just a plethora of different Superman villains that they could have easily utilized for this film. And look, maybe Lex Luthor is just pulling the strings behind the scenes somewhere. and maybe he's just a villain that's kind of like mentioned in passing or just has a few sequences. Same thing with how we mentioned the Green Lantern Corps earlier. Maybe their roles are just very minimal and the teaser just kind of brings them to the forefront without them really being big main key characters throughout the film. But as I said, that's really my only critique. I'm a little bit disappointed that we're going back to the Lex Luthor storyline. We get it. He gets kryptonite. He beats the living snot out of Superman. But I wish we would do something a little bit more intriguing, something a little bit different, especially considering Superman is like this big giant character with this overwhelming power. I just feel like he should go after like one of these brute villains that we've seen so many times in the comic books. But that is just my personal opinion. That's my humble perspective on this entire project. In a nutshell, there's a bunch of actors that I'm not too familiar with, and I don't think the main audience really is. For the most part, we're only too familiar with Nicholas Hoult because he's had some really cool projects here and there. But for the most part, this is an interesting cast to put together. As I said, I trust James Gunn because of his track record, but me personally, I would have gone a different route. It is also worth mentioning before we finish off the video that Mr. Terrific is also featured in this trailer for like a few seconds, as well as Hawkgirl. Both of these characters are very intriguing, but I will say the amount of superheroes and villains that could potentially appear in this film are just absolutely insane. And I love the fact that James Gunn is willing to take that risk because at the end of the day, that's comic books. Sometimes we forget that like an entire comic book art would potentially have like 2 to 3 main villains or at least one villain and then some subplots of other villains wreaking havoc on the city or on the town. So I think this actually makes sense. And I think James Gunn perfectly understands comic books. And I think he is the perfect person to helm this particular project. But as always, as I said, this is my humble personal opinion. Let me know your thoughts down below in the comment section. Are you excited? Are you not? Do you wish Henry Cavill would come back to play Superman one last time? Or are you happy that the mantle is passing on to somebody else? That the torch is being passed on to the newer generation of DC Universe superheroes? Let me know your thoughts down below. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. I'll see you guys in the next one. Thank you.